At exactly 11:47 p.m., billionaire Jonathan Mercer lay motionless on the leather sofa, pretending to be asleep while the door of his private safe stood wide open. Inside were stacks of cash, diamond watches, legal documents, and a sapphire necklace worth more than the housekeeper would earn in 3 lifetimes. Behind the tinted glass wall, Jonathan's security chief watched the hidden camera with one hand resting beside the alarm button. "She'll take something," he whispered through Jonathan's earpiece. "People always do." Jonathan did not answer. His eyes remained closed, but every muscle in his body was tense. For 30 years, Jonathan had built companies, bought skyscrapers, and negotiated deals that changed entire industries. Yet at 62, he trusted almost no one. His wife had died 8 years earlier. His only son spoke to him mainly through lawyers. 3 employees had recently been caught selling private information. And now there was Rosa Alvarez, the quiet housekeeper everyone seemed to like. She had worked in Jonathan's mansion for 7 months. She arrived before sunrise in worn brown shoes, cleaned rooms no guest ever entered, and left each evening carrying a faded blue coat that had been repaired so many times the original stitching was barely visible. She never asked for a raise. She never complained. That made Jonathan suspicious. Earlier that afternoon, he had deliberately opened the safe and arranged the money where it could not be missed. Then he told Rosa he had a migraine and would sleep in the study. It was a cruel test, but Jonathan had stopped believing kindness could exist without a price. The study door creaked open. Rosa stepped inside carrying a folded blanket. Her gray-streaked hair was tied back, and exhaustion rested heavily beneath her eyes. She saw Jonathan on the sofa. Then she saw the open safe. She froze. Jonathan listened to her breathing change. Behind the glass, the security chief leaned closer to the screen. Rosa placed the blanket on a chair. For several seconds, she did not move. Her gaze passed over the cash, the watches, and the necklace. Then she slowly reached into the pocket of her blue coat. Jonathan's fingers tightened against the sofa cushion. "I knew it," the security chief murmured. Rosa pulled out a small, battered children's book. Its green cover was faded, and one corner had been carefully repaired with clear tape. She held it against her chest as though gathering courage. Then she walked toward the safe. Jonathan expected her to hide money inside the book or slip the necklace beneath her coat. Instead, Rosa ignored every valuable object. Her trembling hand reached toward a small silver picture frame resting behind the stacks of cash. It showed Jonathan's late wife standing beside a young girl in a hospital garden. Rosa lifted the photograph, stared at it, and covered her mouth to stop a sob. "No," she whispered. "It can't be you." Jonathan almost opened his eyes. Rosa placed the old children's book beside the photograph. When she opened its first page, Jonathan saw a handwritten message beneath the torn cover. His heart stopped. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to his wife. Rosa sank to her knees in front of the open safe, tears slipping silently down her face. Then she said the name Jonathan had not heard spoken in 26 years. "Emily Mercer saved my life." Rosa did not know Jonathan was awake. She remained on the floor, holding the silver frame in one hand and the old book in the other, as if 26 years had suddenly collapsed around her. Jonathan kept his breathing slow, but the name she had spoken pressed against his chest like a weight. Emily. His wife had spent the final years of her life supporting hospitals, shelters, and literacy programs, often without telling him. Jonathan had admired her generosity, but he had never understood it. To him, charity had always been something measured in checks, tax records, and annual reports. To Emily, it had been personal. Rosa gently returned the photograph to the safe. Then she placed the book back inside her coat and stood. She covered Jonathan with the blanket she had brought. "You chose a good woman," she whispered. "Even if you never knew everything she did." Then she closed the safe door. She did not touch the money. She did not take the necklace. She simply turned off the lamp and left the room. Jonathan opened his eyes. Behind the glass wall, the security chief looked embarrassed. Should I stop her? He asked through the earpiece. No, Jonathan said quietly. Find out who she is. Rosa's life existed far beyond the marble halls of Jonathan's mansion. Each night, she took 2 buses to a small apartment above a laundromat on the south side of the city. The building smelled of detergent, old pipes, and fried onions from the restaurant downstairs. Her apartment had 1 bedroom, 1 broken heater, and a kitchen table with only 2 chairs. 1 chair belonged to Rosa. The other had belonged to her daughter, Sophia. 3 years earlier, Sophia had died after a long illness, leaving Rosa with unpaid bills, a box of clothes she could not bear to open, and a silence that followed her from room to room. Rosa had once worked as a school aide. She loved helping children learn to read, especially the ones who hid in the back because they were ashamed of falling behind. But after Sophia became sick, Rosa left the school and took every cleaning job she could find. By the time she arrived at Jonathan's mansion, she owed money to the hospital, the landlord, and the funeral home. Still, she never stole. Every evening, she opened the same faded green book before going to sleep. It was called The Little Lantern. On the first page, Emily Mercer had written a message in blue ink. For Rosa, who must never forget that darkness is not the end of the story. Rosa traced the words with her finger. That book had been given to her when she was 15 years old, frightened, homeless, and sleeping in the waiting room of a children's hospital while her younger brother fought for his life. Emily had found her there. She had bought Rosa dinner, called a shelter, and stayed until morning. Before leaving, she had handed Rosa the book. One day, Emily had said, "You'll be the light for someone else." Rosa had carried those words through every loss. The next morning, Jonathan watched her from the upstairs balcony as she polished the front table. He noticed the cracked skin on her hands, the loose sole of her shoe, and the way she quietly placed half her breakfast sandwich into a napkin. For later, he asked. Rosa looked up, surprised. For someone who needs it more. Jonathan studied her face. Did you know my wife? Rosa's hand stopped moving. For one long moment, she said nothing. Then she met his eyes. Your wife knew me, she replied. But I'm not sure you ever truly knew her. By noon, Jonathan had learned almost everything about Rosa's life. The security report lay open across his desk, unpaid hospital bills, overdue rent, a daughter's funeral, and 3 cleaning jobs taken within the same month. Beside the report was a photograph from an old charity event. Emily stood in a hospital garden, one hand resting on the shoulder of a frightened teenage girl. The girl was Rosa. Jonathan stared at the picture for a long time. A woman carrying that much debt had stood inches from millions of dollars and taken nothing. Yet instead of easing his suspicion, the report made it worse. People did not enter his life by accident. That was what Jonathan had taught himself after years of betrayals. His son, Daniel, arrived that afternoon wearing a dark tailored coat and the impatient expression of a man who believed every problem could be solved by removing someone. You left the safe open in front of her? Daniel asked. I wanted to know what she would do. And now she claims mother saved her. Convenient. Jonathan looked toward the rain sliding down the tall windows. She didn't ask me for anything. Not yet. Those 2 words remained in the room long after Daniel stopped speaking. An hour later, Rosa was called into the study. The open safe was now locked. The cold white lights above it made the room feel less like a home and more like an interrogation chamber. Daniel stood beside the fireplace. The security chief waited near the door. Rosa entered carrying a tray of untouched coffee. Jonathan pushed the old photograph across the desk. Why didn't you tell me who you were? Rosa looked at the image, then at him. Because I was hired to clean your house, not reopen your wife's past. Daniel gave a humorless laugh. You expect us to believe you came here by coincidence? I came because the agency offered me work. The security chief placed a small velvet box on the desk. It was empty. Jonathan's expression changed. The sapphire necklace is missing. Rosa's face went pale, but she did not step back. That morning, the necklace had been moved from the safe for appraisal. Jonathan knew it. The security chief knew it. Daniel did not. Jonathan had allowed the empty box to be placed there as one final test. "You were alone in this room," Daniel said. "You had access. You have debts." Rosa slowly removed her faded blue coat and placed it over the chair. "Search it." The security chief checked every pocket. He found a bus pass, $6, half a breakfast sandwich wrapped in a napkin, and the battered green book. Nothing else. Daniel's eyes moved toward the book. "What's inside that?" "A promise," Rosa answered. He reached for it, but Rosa pulled it back against her chest. For the first time, anger appeared in her tired eyes. "You may search my pockets," she said. "You may question my poverty. But you will not touch the only kindness I have left." The room fell silent. Jonathan felt something inside him shift, but pride held him in place. "You're suspended until this is resolved," he said. Rosa nodded once. She put on her coat and walked toward the door without defending herself again. Then Jonathan stood too quickly. The room tilted. His hand slipped from the desk, knocking the coffee tray to the floor. The cup shattered against the marble. Daniel assumed his father had stumbled, but Rosa turned immediately. Jonathan tried to speak. Only a broken sound came out. Rosa dropped her bag and rushed toward him. Her face changed from humiliation to terror. "Call an ambulance," she said. Daniel froze. Rosa caught Jonathan before he struck the floor and looked directly into his unfocused eyes. "Mr. Mercer," she whispered, "you're not pretending this time." For 3 seconds, no one moved. Jonathan's body hung heavily in Rosa's arms while rain struck the glass walls like handfuls of gravel. His face had gone strangely slack, and one side of his mouth no longer obeyed him. Daniel finally reached for his phone. "What's happening?" "He may be having a stroke," Rosa said. "Tell them when it started." The security chief stared at her. "How would you know?" Rosa did not answer. She lowered Jonathan carefully onto the rug, supporting his head with her folded blue coat. She did not search for medicine. She did not pretend to be a doctor. She simply kept him still, spoke his name, and watched the clock above the fireplace. "Mr. Mercer, look at me." Jonathan's eyes struggled toward her voice. "Stay here with us." The ambulance arrived in less than 9 minutes, but inside the mansion, those minutes stretched into something enormous. The paramedics rushed Jonathan through the rain, past the open gates and into a hospital where his name usually opened every door. That night, his money did nothing to quiet the machines, soften the fluorescent lights, or remove the fear from Daniel's face. Doctors moved quickly around him. Rosa stood at the far end of the corridor, soaked from the rain, holding her old book against her chest. Daniel paced beneath the cold ceiling lights. "You're not family," he said. "You should go." Rosa looked through the glass at Jonathan. "He was speaking before he fell," she said. Daniel stopped. "What did he say?" "Nothing clearly. But he kept touching his left pocket." The security chief frowned. "There was nothing in it." Rosa looked at him. "You searched his jacket after the ambulance came?" The man nodded. "Then you missed something." Daniel's patience broke. "My father is fighting for his life, and you're talking about a pocket?" Rosa walked to the chair where Jonathan's damp suit jacket had been placed. She turned it inside out, running her fingers slowly along the lining. Then she felt it. A hard rectangular shape had slipped beneath a torn seam. She pulled out a small digital recorder. The room went still. Jonathan had used it for private notes, recording thoughts he did not trust to phones or computers. The device was still running. The security chief pressed play. At first, there was only the sound of the mansion, distant rain, the creak of the study door, Rosa's footsteps. Then Jonathan's voice came through, low and deliberate. "The necklace was removed this morning for appraisal. Rosa Alvarez did not steal it." Daniel's face lost its color. The recording continued. "If anyone accuses her, it is because I allowed the test to go too far. Rosa closed her eyes. But there was more. Jonathan's voice became quieter. She stood before an open safe carrying more pain than most people could survive. She took nothing. I have spent my life studying value, and I nearly failed to recognize it when it was standing in front of me. The security chief stopped the recording. No one spoke. Daniel turned toward Rosa, shame spreading across his face. Before he could apologize, a doctor stepped into the corridor. "The next few hours are critical," she said. He received help quickly. That may have changed everything. Daniel looked at Rosa. She had been accused, humiliated, and dismissed. Yet when Jonathan collapsed, she had not hesitated. Rosa opened the old green book. From between its pages, she removed a folded hospital card, yellowed with age. Emily Mercer's name was printed across the top. Beneath it was a handwritten note describing the warning signs Rosa had once been taught to recognize while caring for her daughter. Daniel stared at the paper. "You knew because of Sophia." Rosa nodded. Then she looked through the glass at the billionaire lying powerless beneath the hospital lights. "No," she whispered. "I knew because someone once stopped for me when everyone else walked past." Jonathan woke 2 days later to the soft rhythm of a heart monitor and the pale morning light slipping through half-closed blinds. For several seconds, he did not know where he was. Then he saw Daniel asleep in a chair beside the bed, his expensive coat folded beneath his head like a pillow. On the windowsill sat the battered green book. Jonathan tried to lift his hand. Daniel woke immediately. "Dad?" Jonathan's voice was weak. "Rosa." Daniel looked down. "She's gone." The words frightened Jonathan more than the machines around him. After he had been taken to the hospital, Rosa had returned to the mansion only long enough to collect her bag. She left her employee key on the kitchen counter. She did not ask for her final wages. She did not defend herself. She simply disappeared into the city before dawn. But she had left the book. Jonathan asked Daniel to open it. Between its worn pages were old bus tickets, a dried hospital flower, and a photograph of 15-year-old Rosa sitting beside a much younger Emily Mercer. On the back, Emily had written a date. October 14, 1998. Jonathan remembered that night. He and Emily had been attending a charity dinner at the hospital. Jonathan had spent most of the evening speaking with investors. Emily had vanished before dessert, leaving him annoyed and embarrassed. When she finally returned near sunrise, she had said only, "Someone needed me." Jonathan had never asked who. Daniel turned another page and found a letter folded into quarters. The paper had softened with age. It was written by Rosa. "Dear Mrs. Mercer. You told me that poor people are not invisible, even when the world looks through them. I believed you because you stayed. My brother did not survive, but because of you, I did. One day, I will stay for someone else." Jonathan closed his eyes. For 26 years, he had believed his wife's greatest legacy was the foundation bearing her name. He had praised the buildings, the scholarships, and the millions donated at gala dinners. But Emily's real legacy had been one frightened girl in a hospital waiting room. A meal. A book. One night of refusing to walk away. Daniel sat beside the bed, unable to look at his father. "I accused her because she was poor," he said. Jonathan shook his head slowly. "So did I." That afternoon, Jonathan demanded to leave the hospital against everyone's advice. He could not yet walk without support, but he insisted on being driven to Rosa's apartment. Daniel helped him climb the narrow stairs above the laundromat. The landlord met them in the hallway. "You're too late," he said. "She was evicted this morning." Jonathan's hand tightened around his cane. "Where did she go?" The man pointed toward a cardboard box near the stairs. "She left that behind." Inside were Sophia's clothes, unpaid medical notices, and a framed photograph of Rosa's daughter holding the same green book. Behind the photograph was another note. "Mr. Mercer. Your wife taught me that kindness is not a debt to be collected. Please do not try to repay me. Jonathan read the sentence twice. Then Daniel noticed a small shelter address printed at the bottom of one hospital notice. They found Rosa there that evening, serving soup to women who had even less than she did. She looked up and saw Jonathan standing in the doorway, pale, unsteady, and leaning heavily on his son. You should be in bed, she said. Jonathan took one slow step forward. So should you. Rosa gave a tired smile. I've slept in worse places. Jonathan held out the green book. You kept your promise to Emily. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. He lowered his voice. Now let me keep mine. Rosa looked at Jonathan's outstretched hand, then at the green book resting in his palm. The sheltered dining room had gone quiet around them. Metal spoons paused above bowls. A child near the window stopped coloring. Even the tired women waiting in line seemed to understand that something important was happening. Jonathan's voice trembled, partly from weakness and partly from shame. I tested your honesty, he said. But all I really exposed was my own. Rosa did not reach for the book. I don't want your money. I know. Then why are you here? Jonathan looked around the crowded shelter, at the peeling paint, the flickering ceiling light, and the people who had learned not to expect promises from men in expensive coats. Because Emily built something I never understood, he said. And you kept it alive. Rosa's eyes moved toward Daniel. For the first time, he stepped forward without arrogance. I judged you before I knew you, he said. I am sorry. The apology was quiet, but it carried more weight than anything he had ever said in a boardroom. Rosa finally took the book. Jonathan did not offer her a mansion, a blank check, or a life of luxury. He had learned that kindness could become another form of control when it ignored what a person truly wanted. Instead, he asked her one question. What would have helped you when you were 15? Rosa looked across the room. A safe bed, she said. Someone who believed I was more than my worst day. And a place where losing everything didn't mean losing your dignity. 3 months later, the abandoned building beside the shelter reopened under a new name, the Little Lantern House. It offered temporary housing, childcare, job training, and reading rooms for families rebuilding their lives. No marble entrance. No gold lettering. No photographs of Jonathan cutting ribbons. Rosa insisted on that. She became its director, though she refused the title at first. Jonathan convinced her by placing 2 papers on the table. The first was a salary high enough to clear Sophia's medical debts. The second gave Rosa full authority over every program in the building. This is not charity, Jonathan told her. It is trust. Rosa signed. Daniel began visiting every Saturday. At first, he arrived in polished shoes and stood awkwardly near the door. Soon, he was repairing shelves, carrying boxes, and reading stories to children who interrupted him every few sentences. Jonathan recovered slowly. The stroke left him with a slight weakness in one hand and a new habit of noticing things he once ignored, the names of the people who cleaned his office, the tired eyes of the drivers waiting outside, the untouched food thrown away after business dinners. He sold the sapphire necklace. The money funded the shelter for 5 years. One evening, Jonathan found Rosa in the reading room. She was sitting beside a quiet little girl wearing an oversized coat and worn shoes. The child held the little lantern in both hands. Rosa pointed to the message Emily had written decades earlier. Do you know what this means? She asked. The girl shook her head. It means darkness doesn't get the last word. Jonathan stood in the doorway, unable to speak. He had opened a safe to discover whether a poor woman would steal from him. Instead, she revealed everything wealth had stolen from him: trust, humility, and the courage to see another person's pain. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness does not end when the moment passes. It travels through years, through strangers, through broken lives, until one day it returns and saves someone you love. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes kindness matters. And tell us in the comments, what small act of compassion have you never forgotten? Like, subscribe, and join us for more stories that remind us how one good choice can change an entire life.